Hey there guys, today it's time to continue the real life superhero legal series where I give you insight into situations that real life superheroes could find themselves in and the legality of those situations. So today we're going to talk about citizen's arrest laws. So a citizen's arrest, for those of you who don't know, is an arrest made by a private person, and it can be made in general if the crime occurs in his or her presence, but there are certain codifications in different areas in the United States as well as Canada, which are the two countries I go over in this series, and those codifications lead to differences concerning what type of crime or who the private person actually is, or whether the crime actually occurs in his or her presence, or whether the person has probable cause. So without further ado, let's jump right in with the United States. So the United States of America has a common law concerning citizen's arrest, which says that a warrantless arrest may be made by a private person for a felony, misdemeanor, or breach of peace. Now for the states I'm going to be discussing today, New York, California, Washington, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Florida, and Tennessee, they pretty much just follow the common law with a few distinct differences. So I'm just going to be briefly discussing the differences between those, and then I'm going to be moving on to actual examples of citizens' arrests, and I guess my take on citizens' arrests. And then we're going to discuss Canada too, so don't worry about that. Florida follows the common law like most states, but according to an article from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, it says that you shouldn't use more force than necessary. You should call police right away, and you should not detain a suspect for more than an hour or use handcuffs, because that could apparently be used against you in court. California has Penal Code 837, which apparently exemplifies the codification of the common law. A private person may arrest another for a public offense committed or attempted in his or her presence, or when the person arrested has committed a felony, although not in his presence, or when a felony has in fact been committed and he or she has reasonable cause for believing the person arrested to have committed it. So essentially what this is saying is, a felony is bad. And if someone commits a felony and you know they've committed a felony, you can arrest them in California whether or not the felony was committed in your presence. Or you have reasonable cause for believing the person arrested to have committed it. Now, the reasonable cause thing, that can be brought up against you in court if in fact the person was not rightfully arrested. If the person did not commit a felony and you arrested them anyway, then you would become a defendant in court and you would have to defend yourself, and that's not a situation any of us want to get into. So just don't do anything stupid. As for the first one, a public offense, you can arrest someone for a public offense, which includes a felony, misdemeanor, and minor infractions, and you can arrest someone for that in California only if it was committed or attempted in your presence. But if it's a felony, then it doesn't have to be in your presence. Ohio has pretty much the exact same law, except it's only for felonies. So only if someone commits a felony can you arrest them as a citizen. I couldn't find anything on New York, so I'm just going to go ahead and assume it is more or less the same as the other states. Washington State apparently only allows citizens arrests for felonies, except in the case where you can arrest someone for a misdemeanor only if it's committed in your presence and it constitutes a breach of peace. Illinois specifically mentions the term ordinance violation, so I suppose that is not enough to arrest someone, but I suppose if you have reasonable cause to believe that someone commits something other than that, you can arrest them. Michigan is more or less the same with a few tweaks. This is the first state that I've mentioned to make a distinction between a private citizen and a merchant or shop owner. And it seems to be a general rule among these states that you can't make a citizen's arrest for shoplifting unless you own the store or are an employee of the store, and it says here an independent contractor providing security for the store. So the Florida article actually made a quick mention of this. I forgot to talk about this earlier, But it says only in rare cases, such as a store employee who catches a person shoplifting, can a civilian arrest someone for a misdemeanor. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of speculation here, but if I were in a store and someone were to be shoplifting and I, for some reason, felt the need to apprehend them, since I'm not working at the store, I can't do that legally. But I believe that if I had the consent from the person who owned the store or someone behind the cash register, if it's at like a gas station or something, if I asked them, hey, do you want me to go grab that guy? And they said, yeah, sure, go for it. Then I could probably go after them then without much legal trouble because I had the consent of the store owner. So the store owner is actually the one making the decision to apprehend the shoplifter. Now, the Michigan Code also says that if a private person is summoned by a peace officer to assist the officer in making an arrest, then they can partake in a citizen's arrest. Now, considering Tennessee's code is exactly the same as California's, with the exception of mentioning that a citizen shall receive no compensation for an arrest, so no Luke Cage heroes for hire kind of stuff, I would go ahead and assume that these codes could be considered standard for whatever state you're in, so I would just go ahead and follow those. These laws aren't as diverse as the mask laws were in the last video. Everything is pretty clear cut and pretty similar no matter where you are. And that is true even for Canada. In Canada, the law is pretty much exactly the same, except they make an extra distinction for someone who is being freshly pursued by people who have lawful authority to arrest them. Those people can be legally arrested by citizens of Canada. And they make another owner of property. So if you own property and someone has taken the property from you, then you can arrest them. Or if you authorize someone to arrest them, they can arrest them. So that's another thing, like the shop owner. If someone shoplifts, the shop owner can give authorization to someone else to apprehend the person who shoplifted. And they say that someone who arrests another person should deliver that person to a peace officer as soon as possible. Now, there's a great article that I read called How to Perform a Citizen's Arrest and Why You Really Shouldn't by Josh Clark. This is on a website called stuffyoushouldknow.com. This article and all the other sources I've used are linked in the description. So this basically gives a lot of information about what citizen's arrests actually are. I highly recommend you read it, and it makes the case against doing them, particularly due to charges you could receive as a result of performing a citizen's arrest. For instance, you could be charged with sexual assault or assault and battery if you use excessive force, or verbal abuse even, or you could be sued by the suspect or their family if they're not convicted, which would be very, very hairy for you, especially as a real-life superhero. That's not something that you want to go through. In addition to that, this article makes the case that people who want to perform citizen's arrests should be very aware of the difference between felonies and misdemeanors, because most of the time you can only arrest someone as a citizen for a felony. Now, that could be murder, aggravated assault, sexual assault, rape, kidnapping, grand theft, burglary, or any number of crimes that are considered felonies. But misdemeanors, on the other hand, are less serious, and most of the time you won't be able to arrest someone for a misdemeanor. And this could be something like drug possession or shoplifting, as stated before, but these are generally less serious crimes, and you shouldn't really arrest someone for a misdemeanor. Misdemeanors can also include petty theft, prostitution, disorderly conduct, trespassing, reckless driving, and vandalism. If you're a real life superhero and you want to arrest someone for prostitution or vandalism or reckless driving, that kind of makes you an asshole. Don't do that. Now here's where I'm kind of tying it back into the mask video. So you remember all those mask laws? Speaking of which, if you haven't watched my previous video about legal implications of being a real life superhero, go check it out. There's a lot of good information there. But bringing it back to the mask law video, there were all these mask laws that had to do with if you're wearing a mask with the intent to violate someone's civil rights, or if you violate someone's civil rights while wearing a mask. All of these really have to do with the KKK, but it could be applied to real life superheroes as well, because a citizen's arrest could be a violation of someone's civil rights if you use excessive force, torture, if you detain them in cruel or unsafe conditions, or you invent a reason to arrest them for an ulterior motive or something like that. So if that happens, you could be subject to charges of violating the suspect's civil rights. In addition to that, you could be liable to charges of impersonating police, false imprisonment, kidnapping, or wrongful arrest if the person you arrested is not the right person. So this is a very delicate matter. This is no joke. So you really should be careful about what you're doing when you're operating as a real life superhero. I do have a few examples of citizens' arrests that have happened in the real world, just so you guys can get a picture of what they look like in real life. There were a few that happened in Florida. I got this from the Sun Sentinel article. So there was an armed robbery in Boynton Beach, where the robber got put in a chokehold after he tried to hold up a 63-year-old former wrestler. So that's a good example of a successful citizen's arrest. The wife of the 63-year-old former wrestler kept a pellet gun aimed at the robber until police arrived. So again, remaining at the scene till police arrive is a very crucial part of performing a citizen's arrest. In addition to that, there was another man in Florida who chased a hit-and-run driver who crashed into a motorcyclist. The man followed him and then yanked him out of his car. Turns out the driver was drunk and wrestled him to the ground. He kept the man in a headlock until the police arrived. So again, remaining at the scene is important. And I would assume that the police would want your name in the report, so that could be tricky, to remain at the scene and then be asked to reveal your secret identity right there if you're masked. And if not, if you just use handcuffs, like I said before, handcuffing someone to something, or even webbing them, if that was even possible, if Spider-Man would really web someone to something in order to keep him until the police arrived, like in the movies and the comics, then if they got away, Spider-Man could be subject to charges because he performed a citizen's arrest without waiting until the police arrived and the suspect got away. Now, as it turns out, there have also been some unsuccessful citizen's arrests. For instance, in 2012, there was a stabbing of 4 guardian angels. So the guardian angels are a group that performed citizen's arrests for violent crimes. They can be considered real-life superheroes, I suppose. They're very well known, and they've been around since the 70s. So there were 4 guardian angels on a train platform in Chicago, and they spotted a man hitting a passenger and stealing his phone. So they intervened, and a second man pulled a knife and cut 3 of them on their arms and a 4th guardian angel on his head. So the robbers ran off and grabbed a cab. So they got away, but they got surveillance photos, and I assume that the investigation continued from there. But as for the citizen's arrest itself, it was clearly unsuccessful, and the performers of the citizen's arrest were harmed. Now, they all survived, but one of them was left with 17 stitches in his arm. So keep that in mind when I'm giving you all this information about citizens' arrests, they can be legally performed in some circumstances, yes, but that doesn't absolve you of all danger that could be present when performing one. For instance, a suspect is more than likely going to be armed, I assume, just because of the nature of things, but you know, that makes them dangerous. So I guess just be careful out there, guys, and yeah. So that's pretty much it for this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I just want to get this up as quick as possible. I'm coming down with a little bit of a cold, but hopefully I can give you guys a couple more updates this week. Hope you guys have a beautiful day, and stay amazing.